The film opens with a space shuttle crashing into the Earth, creating a debris path across the United States. Despite government warnings to avoid the potentially contaminated debris, some individuals unintentionally come into contact with it. Meanwhile, Tucker Kaufman, the head of the Centers for Disease Control, CDC, arrives at a crash site to investigate. During the examination of the surviving shuttle parts, the CDC identifies peculiar life forms. A scientist confirms that these life forms are unquestionably extraterrestrial and not of earthly origin. As Tucker departs the site, he inadvertently touches a fragment of debris, exposing himself to contamination. Upon Tucker's return home, his dog initially approaches to greet him, but quickly growls and walks away. Later, while Tucker is asleep, he experiences tremors, and his entire body undergoes a peculiar transformation. In a different setting, Tucker's ex-wife, Carol, is awakened during the night by the sound of her son, Oliver. To prevent further nightmares, Carol decides to join Oliver in the bedroom to sleep together. The following morning, Tucker contacts Carol, expressing a desire to see his son. However, she declines his request and ends the phone call. Later, Carol drops Oliver off at school and encounters her close friend, Dr. Ben Driscoll, who offers her a ride to the office. Ben informs her that many scientists believe the shuttle disaster was intentional, leading to several resignations. During their conversation, Carol shares details about Tucker's call and confesses that he hasn't been a good father. Despite this, Ben persuades her that Tucker has a rightful claim to see his son. Later, Carol arrives at her office, and we learn that she is a psychiatrist. Her first patient is a middle-aged woman named Wendy, who explains that her husband has been acting strange lately. She claims that her husband killed their pet dog and threw it away in the garbage. Carol then gives her patient a new medication and ends their therapy. That evening, Carol and her friend take their children outside for Halloween. When the kids arrive at a house, the dog inside begins to howl incessantly at her friend's son, Andy. When the dog follows him and attacks him, the boy shows no fear. Unexpectedly, he grips the dog's mouth and purposefully squeezes it. Later, at home, Carol suspects Andy is ill because he appears to be disconnected from others. She then finds the unusual piece of flesh on Oliver's palm and carefully places it in a bag. Next, Carol brings the skin sample she obtained to Ben's hospital, where his colleague, Dr. Stephen Galliano, begins his research. Meanwhile, a mystery virus has begun to spread across the country. Tucker is hosting a press conference to highlight the new vaccination and its potential to contain the infection. Later, we notice some staff with dead expressions putting saliva into the drink that will be served to the conference attendees. Later, Carol and Oliver are on their way to Tucker's house when they come across a woman who stops the car and begs for help. She keeps saying that something awful will happen, and then suddenly, she is hit by a van. Soon after, authorities come to the scene, and Carol says she observed the accident and can offer testimony, but the officer tells Carol to leave and tells her they will call her if necessary. Soon, Carol and Oliver arrive at Tucker's home, where he greets them with a blank expression. He invites Carol inside, but she is about to leave for a party. Later, Carol and Ben are seen attending a party hosted by Henrik, a Czech diplomat, and his wife, Ludmila. They are introduced to Yorish, a Russian diplomat who debates with Carol about the dark nature of people. After the party, Ben tries to kiss Carol in the car, but she refuses, saying she doesn't want to ruin their friendship. Meanwhile, Oliver is hanging out with his friend, Jean, when he says that something is amiss with his father. Then, when he enters the house, Tucker offers Oliver a hot chocolate spiked with his saliva. Moments later, a strange person approaches Carol in her home. The man claims to be from the Census Bureau and needs to ask questions for updates. Carol notices something off about the man's demeanor. She promises to return and they can talk between the doors, but as soon as she walks away, the man tries to unlock the door and forces his way in. Carol rushes to the door and slams it, causing his arm to become stuck. He then tries to break in with his muscles, but fails to do so and leaves the scene. Immediately, Carol calls Ben in panic and asks him to come over. The next morning, while Carol is heading to the office, she discovers several people standing with blank expressions and staring weirdly. When she arrives at the office, she finds that all of their patients' schedules for the day have been cancelled. After encountering an odd series of events, she searches the internet for similar events and finds out that many other people have noticed that the people around them have changed. Even her secretary, Carly, behaves suspiciously and brings her a cup of tea to drink. But Carol gets interrupted by a phone call from Ben and does not take the drink. The scene then shifts to the hospital lab, where Stephen examines the material Carol brought to him the day before. He states that the sample contains some extremely resilient spores that take over a human's body when they enter REM sleep. It combines DNA from the victim and reprograms genetic expression. So, to avoid a fatal infection, they are prohibited from sleeping until a treatment is found. Just then, Ben receives a call from Ludmilla, who is concerned about Yorish. Therefore, Ben, Stephen, and Carol head to Ludmilla's home. Upon arriving there, they see Yorish laying on a bed, covered in cellular condensation. Carol tries to photograph him, but the monster-like man awakens and attacks her. However, before any real damage is done, Ben stops Yorish, causing him to vomit a strange substance and die. After this, Carol hurries out of the home and drives over to get Oliver. When she arrives at Tucker's house, she discovers that it is full of infected people. Carol is worried about her son, but Tucker assures her that he is with her friend Jean, although she doesn't believe him. When she tries to leave, the people there try to block her every exit. Tucker states that after getting infected, she will become like them, and that they are promising a better world with more humanity. He then pulls her down and spits his saliva on her, trying to infect her. However, Carol rushes to the street, asking for help, but no one responds. Then, she enters the subway and receives a message from Oliver. It turns out that he has been taken to a mysterious location by his father. Meanwhile, a man in front of Carol asks her to remain cool and not show emotion, or they will recognize her. So, Carol also sits quietly with a blank expression on her face. However, a gang of infected persons soon arrives and begins a brawl. They try to catch Carol, but she manages to exit the train and run. She then tries to blend in with the infected people by keeping her emotions steady. Later, Carol meets Ben and Stephen in Ludmilla's house, where they discover that the spores travel through bodily fluids, such as blood and saliva. They must stay awake because there is no way to tell if they are infected. Stephen and his assistant plan to go to Fort Detrick to look for treatment, while Ben decides to accompany Carol to find Oliver first. Meanwhile, Henrik arrives home with a huge group of infected people, but the group flees before the infected can catch up with them. On the street, Carol sees her patient, Wendy, being arrested by police because she has already slept, but is not yet infected. Carol and Ben suspect Wendy may be immune to the virus and decide to look for her medical records. At Carol's office, they find out that Wendy has a brain-affecting condition called ADEM. It prevents the virus from taking over the brain matter and helps in the development of immunity to the virus. Carol then realizes that Oliver is immune to the virus as well, because he also had ADM as a child. Just then, Stephen calls Ben to tell him that he has arrived at Fort Detrick and is working with other scientists to develop a cure for the virus. Meanwhile, Carol receives a text message from Oliver saying that he is being detained at his grandmother's house in Baltimore. Carol tells Ben that she's infected, but he tells her not to sleep and promises her that everything will be all right. The two then hug each other and part ways. Now, Carol starts going through the city to find her child. On the train, she begins to feel drowsy, but she resists her urge to sleep to keep the virus from attacking her system. Later, she meets Oliver's friend, Jean, who is now infected. Jean informs her that his parents are no longer alive, therefore he lives with Tucker and is on his way to his house. Carol and Jean meet Tucker at the train station and they make their way to the house. During their meal, Carol notices that Oliver is missing from the table. Just then, she receives an unexpected call from Ben. However, she picks up the phone calmly and informs him of her location while pretending to be speaking with a patient. Sometime later, Carol finds Oliver and reconciles with him. The boy mentions that he is still uninfected, although he sleeps every day. However, Jean arrives and catches the two of them together. Having no other option, Carol quickly knocks Jean unconscious and flees with Oliver. On the way out, Tucker and his colleagues begin to follow the mother and son. They manage to hide in a basement, but Tucker follows them and tries to hurt them. However, Carol grabs an iron bar and smashes him in the head, ultimately killing him. Soon, Carol and Oliver arrive at a nearby pharmacy. She takes some medicines to keep herself awake and hands Oliver a syringe to inject her if she falls asleep. Then she calls Ben and informs him of her location. Meanwhile, Carol discovers a room full of infected people. After coming out of that room, she grabs a gun and tells Oliver not to open the door. Next, people in the infected room wake up and constantly hit on the door to escape. When Oliver notices his mother has fallen asleep, he injects her and wakes her up. Soon, Ben also arrives at the scene, and Carol is relieved to see him. She then tries to hug him, but quickly discovers that Ben has also been infected. He tries to convince Carol to embrace the new society with no crime, conflict, or bloodshed, while also pointing out that immune people like Oliver have no place in this society. A horrified Carol points her gun at him, but Ben opens the door and allows all of the infected people to come out. However, Carol shoots and kills them one by one, and when it comes to Ben, she just shoots him in the leg and escapes with Oliver. Following this, they steal a police car while narrowly avoiding many infected people. Unfortunately, Carol crashes on the way and starts falling asleep. The infected surround the car and attempt to break in, so Oliver awakens his mother and they proceed to drive. Meanwhile, Carol receives a phone call from Stephen and Oliver answers it. He tells Stephen where they are while his mother drives their car. Stephen tells her to climb to the top of a building so he can take them up in a helicopter. When Carol and Oliver make it to the roof, the infected aren't far behind her, but they make it onto the helicopter just in the nick of time. The scene then shifts to a year later, when society has returned to normal after Stephen and his team's invention of the vaccine. He then gives an interview in which he claims that since the spore attaches to the brain during REM sleep, no one remembers anything, even after being cured. The victims simply feel as if they have awoken from a dreamless nap. And as the movie ends, we see that Carol and Ben have moved in together and are now living with Oliver and Jean. And with that, the movie ends. We hope you enjoyed our video. Watch the next recaps on the screen, and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing recaps. See you in the next one.